Listener discretion is advised. This episode discusses homicide, violence, and sensitive themes that may be disturbing to some listeners. Please take care while listening. Time is a strange thing. For most of us, it's a line. You were born, you live, and then one day the line stops. But for the families of the missing, time doesn't stop. It shatters. It becomes a room you can't leave. You are stuck in the moment they vanished, forever replaying the last hug, the last word, the last time you saw them walk out the door. On June 30th, 2014, at 10 a.m., a woman named Jennifer O'Brien walked into that room. She opened the door to her parents' house in the quiet Calgary community of Park Hill and found a scene so confusing, so violent, that it took years for the full horror to be understood. Inside, she did not find her parents, Alvin and Kathy Lickness, and she did not find her 5-year-old son, Nathan. What she found was an empty house, a broken lock, and blood on the walls. What follows is not just the story of a crime. It is the story of 3 lives that were extinguished and the ghost who took them. It is a story that begins in the optimism of post-war Canada, winds through oil fields and meth labs, and ends in a fire pit on a farm north of the city. This is the ghost of Airdrie. Hey friends, welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to Dark Roast Caffeine Case Files. I'm your host, Kate. Settle in, grab something dark, and sip slowly. To understand the depth of this loss, we have to go back to the beginning, to a time before the blood, before the trial, before the name Douglas Garland meant anything at all. Our first stop is the vast open prairie, the town of Coronation, Alberta. Incorporated 1911, it's the kind of place named for optimism, for royalty, for the hope of a new century. It sits roughly halfway between Calgary and the Saskatchewan border, a speck on the map where the sky dominates everything. It was here on June 22nd, 1948, that Alvin Cecil Lickness was born. He was a child of the prairies, which meant he was raised with a certain stoicism, a practical understanding of the world. But Alvin was different. He wasn't just practical, he was curious. He was, as his family would later describe him, an original thinker. He was the kind of guy who would fix your toaster, then explain the physics of how electricity worked while he did it. He didn't just want to know the how, he wanted to know the why. That curiosity defined his life. He didn't just get a job, he chased ideas. He got into the oil and gas business, the lifeblood of Alberta. But he wasn't content to just be a cog in the machine. He was an inventor. He held patents, he saw problems and designed solutions. It was a trait that would, decades later, put him in the crosshairs of a man who couldn't stand to see someone else succeed. But Alvin wasn't all gears and grease. He was a man who believed in living fully. He was an avid skier, a pilot, and even a skydiver. He wanted to know what it felt like to fall through the air, to dive deep into the dark blue sea, to push past the boundaries of the ordinary. He drove a series of cool cars, vans, and Porsches that hinted at a free-spirited teacher beneath the practical exterior. To his children, he was a giant, a man whose hugs made you feel like you were the most important person in the universe. 13 years after Alvin was born, in the bustling, growing city of Calgary, Catherine Faye Lickson entered the world on April 5th, 1961. If Alvin was the grand, sweeping landscape, Kathy was the warm, beating heart of the home. From the very beginning, her rule was clear. She was the glue. If you needed anything, a place to stay, a meal, someone to watch your dog, someone to just listen, you called Kathy. a friend said. She didn't just answer the call, she was already on her way before you finished asking. Kathy was a force of nature disguised as a homemaker. She earned certificates in web design and graphic design, embracing new technology with the same joy and abandon she brought to her holiday decorating. She got her real estate license. She could whip up a gourmet meal or a craft project from scratch. She was entrepreneurial, creative, and endlessly energetic. But her true masterpiece was her family. She and Alvin built a blended family, merging children from previous marriages into a tight, loving clan. It wasn't always easy, but Kathy made it work. Through sheer force of will and an endless capacity for love, holidays at the Lickness house were legendary. She transformed their home into a winter wonderland, a Halloween-haunted house, a spring paradise. She made magic. Together, Alvin and Kathy were the center of a solar system. Their children, their friends, their community, all orbited around their warmth. One of those children was Alvin's son, Alan. Alan would grow up and marry a woman named Patty. It was a connection that seemed perfectly normal, just another happy branch on the family tree. But Patty had a brother who lived on a farm north of the city, a brother who was quietly, secretly building his own world of resentment. His name was Douglas Garland. Douglas Robert Garland was born on a date that would become a point of obsession for the investigators, who would later hunt him. But unlike Alvin and Kathy, whose lives were built in the light, Douglas Garland's story is one of shadows, of deliberate erasure, of a mind that twisted reality to fit its own dark narrative. Garland was a highly intelligent loner. He lived with his parents on a small farm near Airdrie. He was unmarried, often unemployed, but he possessed a sharp, technical mind, particularly with computers and chemistry. He drove an old 1994 Ford F-150 he kept to himself. But in the early 1990s, the quiet on the Garland farm was shattered. Police raided the property and uncovered a meth lab. It wasn't just a small operation for personal use. It was a manufacturing plant. Douglas Garland was arrested and faced serious federal drug charges. He was looking at significant prison time, and that's when he pulled his first great vanishing act. Garland didn't just run, he erased himself. He obtained the birth certificate of a teenager who had died in a car crash in the town of Cardston, Alberta. He took this dead boy's name, his social insurance number, his entire identity, and he became that person. For years, he lived as a ghost, walking among the living under a stolen name. Think about that for a moment. This isn't just fraud. This is a profound act of psychological appropriation. He wasn't just hiding from the law. He was consuming another person's existence. He was telling the world that he had the right to be whoever he wanted, to take whatever he needed. It's a glimpse into a mind that sees the rules of society, the very identities of other people, as obstacles to be removed. He lived under the alias for years, evading capture, but eventually the law caught up. He was arrested, convicted, and served time for the drug charges. By the mid-2000s, he was back on the family farm in Airdrie, ostensibly a charged man. But the core of who he was, the resentment, the grandiosity, the belief that he was smarter than everyone else, had only hardened. He began doing odd jobs. He was good with his hands, and through his sister Patty, who was married to Alan Lickness, he got a lead on some work. Alan's father, Alvin, was an inventor. He had a patent on a pump for the oil industry. He needed someone to do some electrical wiring work on it. He hired his son's brother-in-law, Douglas Garland. It was a small act of nepotism, a simple family favor. It would prove to be the deadliest mistake of Alvin Lickness's life. The work began around 2005 or 2006. Garland, nursing his own ideas of grandeur, made some changes to the design. He became convinced that his contributions were monumental. He believed he was an inventor, a partner. He approached Alvin and demanded to be named as a co-inventor on the patent. Alvin Lickness, the original thinker, the man who valued fairness and human rights, disagreed. The pump wasn't even a commercial success. It never made a dime. But that was irrelevant to Garland. It was the principle. It was the rejection. It was the ultimate slight from a man who had everything: a loving family, a creative mind, a future, to a man who had nothing but a stolen identity and a festering grudge. Garland was let go from the work around 2007. In his mind, a war had begun. He neither forgave nor forgot. For the next 7 years, Garland watched the Lickness family. Using his computer skills, he conducted regular, obsessive online searches. He monitored Alvin's activities, his business dealings, his life. And in time, his sick obsession grew to include Kathy. He became fascinated with her, with the life they had built. He was like a spider in the corner of a web, waiting, feeling every vibration, nursing his hatred. The situation escalated in December 2013. The Lickness family was at the Garland farm for a visit. After they left, Garland claimed that some items, a few tools, some scrap metal, were missing. He was convinced Alvin had stolen from him. Whether this was true or just another paranoid delusion, for Garland, it was the final proof. In his mind, Alvin Lickness was not just an intellectual thief, he was a common criminal. The grudge had become a death warrant. By the spring of 2014, the Licknesses were looking toward the light. They had sold their home in the desirable Calgary community of Park Hill. They had bought a new place in Edmonton and planned to split their time between there and a condo in Mexico. After decades of work, of raising children, of building a life, they were finally going to retire. They were going to dance on the beach. To prepare for the move, they decided to hold an estate sale. It was a practical decision. They had accumulated a lifetime of furniture, art, and knickknacks. They didn't need it for their new, simpler life. They set the date for the last weekend of June 2014. Sunday, June 29th, was the second day of the sale. The house was full of strangers browsing their belongings, a final public viewing of their old life. Kathy's daughter, Jennifer O'Brien, was there helping. She had her 2 young sons with her, 3-year-old Max and 5-year-old Nathan. Nathan O'Brien was a typical 5-year-old boy. He was full of energy, obsessed with superheroes, with a smile that could light up a room. He had a special bond with his Nana and Papa. He loved sleeping over at their house, where he was the center of their world. As the sale wound down, the family had dinner together. The plan was for Jennifer to take both boys home, but little Max was restless, tired from the long day. To make it easier on everyone, Jennifer made a decision, a split-second choice born of love and convenience. She would take Max home, but Nathan could stay for one last impromptu sleepover with his grandparents. It was the last sleepover of the summer, a final bit of fun before they moved away. Jennifer hugged her son goodbye. She kissed her parents. She walked out the door with Max just before midnight. She had no idea she was leaving them in the path of a hurricane. Back in Airdrie, Douglas Garland was finishing his preparations. His online searches had taken a dark turn months before. He hadn't just been looking up the Licknesses. He had been researching how to kill. His computer history, which police would later recover, was a chilling blueprint for murder. He searched for terms including how to kill without emotion, force needed for concussion, most painful torture, and how to dispose of a body. He researched the specific type of lock on the Lickness's home, searched how to drill it out. He purchased restraints, handcuffs, a straitjacket, tasers. He went to a butcher supply store and bought meat hooks, butcher knives, and a meat saw. He had built a kill kit. He had a plan, and he had a deadline. The Licknesses were leaving. If he was going to make them pay, it had to be that night. At approximately 3:10 a.m. on June 30th, 2014, a neighbor's security camera captured a distinctive green 1994 Ford F-150 truck driving slowly down the street. It was Douglas Garland. He parked. He walked to the side door of the Lickness home. First, he disabled the home's internet router, cutting off any potential Wi-Fi security cameras. Then, just as he had researched, he drilled out the lock on the door. He stepped inside. What happened in the next few minutes was so violent that it defied comprehension. The police would later find a scene of horrific struggle. The living room and guest room were drenched in blood. There was so much blood that had soaked through the carpets and into the plywood subfloor below. They found pools of blood mixed with broken human teeth. It was a testament to a desperate, brutal fight for survival. Alvin, Kathy, and little Nathan were beaten into submission. They were alive, but incapacitated. Garland then did something strange. He tried to clean up. He found a mop and bucket and attempted to mop the blood off the floor, as if he could erase the evidence of his violence. Then, one by one, he dragged them out of their home and loaded them into the back of his truck. At 7:45 a.m., as the sun was rising over Calgary, the same security camera captured the green truck leaving the neighborhood. Inside were 3 people who would never see the light of day again. At 10 a.m., Jennifer O'Brien arrived at her parents' house. She was cheerful, ready to pick up her son and hear about his sleepover adventure. She tried the door. It was locked, which was strange. She used her key. The door opened, but it felt wrong. It was off its track. She stepped inside. She saw the blood first, on the walls, on the floor, everywhere. She screamed. She ran through the house, calling their names. The house was empty. The beds were unmade. Her parents' and son's shoes were still there. Their phones were still there, but they were gone. The 911 call she made would haunt the dispatcher who answered it. Her voice was a raw wound of panic and disbelief. At 11:13 a.m., Calgary police arrived. Within hours, they knew this was not a simple missing persons case. The volume of blood was catastrophic. A forensic analysis would later estimate that the amount of blood found at the scene suggested the victims had suffered life-threatening, if not fatal, injuries inside the home. The search for the family began. It was the largest ground search in Calgary Police Service history. Over 200 officers were deployed. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Hawks scoured the neighborhood. By that evening, police had a person of interest. A neighbor's security camera had captured that green Ford F-150, and tips were coming in about a man named Doug Garland, the disgruntled former employee with the farm in Airdrie. Late that night, police arrived at the Garland farm. They were met by Douglas Garland's elderly parents. They said their son was in Calgary for the night. The police looked around, saw nothing obviously amiss, and left. They missed him by hours. The next morning, July 1st, Canada Day, the family made a desperate public plea through tears. Jennifer O'Brien spoke to the cameras. Quote, "Nathan, if you're out there, we love you. We're never going to stop looking for you. Please, if anyone knows anything, just tell us. We need to bring him home." The plea reverberated across the country. The image of little Nathan, with his missing front teeth and bright smile, was on every newscast, every newspaper. An Amber Alert was issued, the longest running in Canadian history. But even as the public searched for a missing boy, investigators were starting to fear the worst. Later that day, police returned to the Garland farm with a search warrant. This time, they found him. Douglas Garland was arrested for an outstanding warrant on an unrelated matter, a minor theft charge, just to get him into custody while they investigated. But as they led him away, they looked at the farm with new eyes. It was a sprawling property with several outbuildings, a large garden, and a fire pit. It would take weeks to fully search it, using ground-penetrating radar and forensic anthropologists. But the first major clue came from the sky. The city of Airdrie routinely takes aerial photographs for property assessment. By chance, a plane had flown over the Garland farm on the afternoon of July 1st, just hours after the family's public plea. When investigators later obtained these photos, they were stunned. The high-resolution image showed the property in stark detail. Near a large outbuilding in the grass, there were 3 distinct shapes. They were shapes of human bodies, 2 larger, 1 smaller. They were lying in the grass. The next day, another aerial photo was taken. The shapes were gone. In their place was a patch of disturbed earth and a freshly burned area in the fire pit. The search of the farm became a meticulous, horrific excavation. They found tiny fragments of bone. They found teeth. They found pieces of jewelry that Kathy Lickness was known to wear. They found Nathan's beloved shoes. In the pit, they found the incinerated remains of what forensic experts would later determine were 3 human beings. They also found the hardware from the restraints Garland had bought, rivets and grommets from the straitjackets, melted but identifiable. Douglas Garland had not just killed them, he had tried to erase them, to burn them into nothingness, just as he had once tried to erase himself. For 2 years, Douglas Garland sat in a Calgary jail cell, awaiting trial. He said nothing. He showed no remorse. He was a ghost again, waiting in the shadows. The trial began in January 2017. It was a media circus. The courtroom was packed with the families of the victims, including Jennifer O'Brien, who had to sit just feet away from the man accused of murdering her son and parents. The Crown's case was overwhelming. It was a mosaic of circumstantial evidence, but each piece fit perfectly with the next. There was the motive, the decade-old grudge over the patent. There was the opportunity. Garland's distinctive truck was seen on the street that night. There was the planning, the chilling internet searches for torture and restraint methods. There was the forensic evidence. Garland's blood was found mixed with the victim's blood at the crime scene. And there was the damning physical evidence from the farm, the bone fragments, the teeth, the melted restraints, and the aerial photographs showing the bodies. The defense argued that the evidence was purely circumstantial. They claimed the bone fragments were too small to be conclusively identified, that the fire could have been for burning trash, that Garland's presence on the street was a coincidence. They pointed out that no murder weapon was ever found. But the most powerful moment of the trial came when the Crown played a hidden recording while in jail. Garland had spoken with his mother, Elsie, on a monitored phone line. He didn't know they were being recorded. It wasn't a confession, but to the jury, it was the sound of a guilty man protecting his mother from the truth. It was the sound of a man who knew exactly what he had done. After 3 months of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a day. On February 10, 2017, he returned with a verdict, guilty, on 3 counts of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Douglas Garland sat motionless, his face a blank mask. There was no flinch, no tears, no sign of emotion. He was already a ghost. The sentencing hearing was an opportunity for the victims' families to confront the man who had stolen everything from them. One by one, they stood up and spoke. They described the gaping hole in their lives. They described Nathan as a beautiful little boy who will never grow up. They described the torture of not knowing, of hoping, of the final brutal confirmation of their worst fears. Jennifer O'Brien looked directly at Garland and delivered a statement that left the courtroom in tears. Quote, "You took my baby, you took him in the night, and you hurt him, and you burned him, but you did not break us. We are still a family, we still love, and you are nothing. You are a name we will forget. But Nathan will live forever." The judge sentenced Douglas Garland to life in prison with no chance of parole for 75 years, a sentence that was, at the time, the harshest in Canadian history since the abolishment of the death penalty. It meant that Garland, then in his face, would die in prison. He would never see the outside world again. So we return to where we started, to time, and to the room Jennifer O'Brien walked into on that June morning. For years after the trial, she would talk about the dreams. She would dream that Nathan was still alive, that it was all a mistake, that he would come running through the door. She would wake up, and for one blissful second, she wouldn't remember. And then the reality would crash down on her all over again. The Park Hill house was eventually sold. A new family lives there now. They probably don't know about the blood that once soaked the floorboards. They probably don't know about the little boy who had a sleepover and never woke up. On the Garland farm, the outbuildings have been torn down. The land sits empty, a scar on the prairie. Douglas Garland sits in a maximum security prison in Alberta. He has no visitors. He is at last truly alone. Alvin Lickness was a man who loved wide open spaces and clear starry nights. Kathy Lickness was a woman whose heart was pinned to her sleeve. And Nathan O'Brien was a 5-year-old boy who loved his grandparents. They were not just victims, they were a family. They were a solar system. And on a cold night in June, a ghost with a grudge snuffed out their light. But Jennifer was right. They are not forgotten. Their names are spoken. Their story is told. And in the hearts of those who loved them, they are still dancing. This story was based on court documents, police evidence, and extensive media coverage from the Calgary Herald, CBC News, and Global News. We honor the memories of Alvin Lickness, Catherine Lickness, and Nathan O'Brien. The next episode will be episode 3 of the Calgary, Alberta True Crime series, where I will be talking about the unsolved death of Amanda and Tony, a woman who was found brutally murdered by her husband after returning home from a weekend trip. Thank you for listening to The Ghost of Airdrie. As always, stay safe. And please take care of yourself after listening to this episode. Do something grounding, call a friend, pet a dog, sit in the sunlight for a few minutes. The darkness in these stories is real, but so is the light in the world. Don't forget to find it. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Please follow me on Substack, Instagram, and Facebook. The links are in the show notes. Stay tuned for more coffee and more crime. Bye now.